Hello, I'm your host, Kwame Ennis, and welcome to the People's Forum. Hello, America. Welcome back. I have an exciting guest for you tonight. His name is Shawn D. Rochester. He's the author of The Black Tax. How are you, Shawn?
I'm doing great. It's great to be here with you.
This has been a roller coaster ride the last few weeks. The first time I actually watched your presentation on Google, watched some of the subsequent interviews, and then ordered the book, read it. I've been floored. I can't even explain what it's done to my life. These are one of the things, when I was 12 years old, I read Malcolm X's autobiography, changed my life, named my daughter after his daughter. These are one of those books or things in your life where you say, wow, this is life-changing. You know, this has done something to me. My 75-year-old mother is now a fan of Shawn Rochester.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I'm honored, I'm humbled by that. And it's part of the reaction that I want us all to have. Right? It's to understand the history, the impact, and to understand, most importantly.
Okay. Without any further ado, and I hope I'm not going to be too anxious, but I want everybody to know who you are. Who's Shawn D. Rochester? Where did this phenomenon start? Where were you born?
So I was born in Barbados. So I'm originally from Barbados. I came up here when I was like, 5.5. Stayed in Brooklyn for a couple years, moved to Queens for a number of years after that. And then after elementary school, went back to Barbados. And that's really, I got my formal education there.
Okay. And for those who don't know, Barbados, like many other places, British system,
Yeah.
A-levels, O-levels?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So it was a real gift to go back there, to be a part of that education system and the level of requirements that they had. Because I did public school here in New York City. I was just like the typical kid, right? Typical kid, which is behind. But going there and being put into a school that I could have actually never tested into, and having to rise to a level of excellence, absolutely, and to be around amazing black teachers and super smart people.
So, question: your experience as a public school kid, myself as well, PS 28. What was that like? Did you have a cognizant thought that you weren't getting what you needed, or how'd that work?
No, I mean, for one of the biggest things I remember, like when I was at elementary school, I didn't really do homework, right? And it wasn't a rebellious kind of thing. My friends didn't really do homework, right? And we went out, we had a good time, we played, right? A lot of sports and different things.
Were you a reader? By chance? Comics or
I wasn't really a reader. I was always curious, but I wasn't really a reader. It wasn't until I went back to Barbados, and I got put into Combermere School there, which is an amazing school. It's over 300 years old. And I could have never tested in there. But the requirements were just much higher. Like you had to study 13 subjects at 12, right? So
that's a heck of a load.
It's math, it's English, it's physics, chemistry, biology, it's literature, language, music, appreciation theory.
But they've been building on that since the first grade.
Right.
Whereas you come into it, literally 7 years later.
Yeah, it was a shock to my system. Like, music to me was what I heard on the radio. It wasn't notes, and it wasn't the Italian that describes what you're supposed to do, or the Latin, right? So it took an adjustment. But what was different there is it's just about whether you work hard or not. It's not a perception of your ability. Like, you can't do it. It's like, if you work hard, you're able to do whatever. And you don't get credit for showing up. You don't get partial credit. They list everybody and categorize, like, you know where you stand in every subject in every class. And it took me a year of a lot of pain to really adjust and then to start to thrive.
Okay, okay. How did your family take this?
Me going back there?
Yeah, because you have a younger brother or older brother?
Older brother.
Older brother?
Yeah.
Did he go as well, or?
No, he stayed here. For me, for the family, there was no plan to this. Like, this is a super important thing in my life, going there. like divine intervention is how I see it. But there was no plan to it. I just used to spend summers in Barbados. I liked it. You know, in the city, things can get out of control real quick, right? Even if you're not like super in the middle of craziness, it can still meet you. I just liked being there. It was just calm, it was tranquil, so on and so forth. And I just said, hey, can I stay here? And I was just staying with my mom's sister.
Auntie,
right?
exactly.
My Aunt Barbara. So it wasn't like, it was like, okay.
But that's often a great feeling. I mean, I have a similar recollection of going to an island in the summer, and you know, you couldn't wait until June 26th, you know, so you could get on the plane and go, and then your cousins are all there. Like you said, not the same environment as New York. You know, it's, you know, kick your shoes off and go out in the yard, and
nobody, you don't need a key. Somebody's always home. You know what I mean? Like, there's lots of work to do because we grew our own stuff.
But there's a lot of discipline in the islands as well.
There's no doubt. Yeah. Corporal punishment is in effect. That whole village raise the child thing is in effect.
Yes, you could actually get beaten 3 times before you actually get home if enough aunts and uncles or church sisters catch you.
Yeah. We take it real.
So, at what age did you come back to the States?
I came back and I did my, I think it was like 15 or 16. I came back and I did like junior and senior year in Queens, and then I went off to university, got a degree in engineering because I liked math and science.
And that undergrad degree is from the University of
Rochester. Yeah, in upstate New York. No relation.
No relation. That's a little comedy,
right?
You know, but that had to be fun.
Yeah, it was great seeing your name everywhere. It was tough, people asking you about it every day, literally, right, for the time you were there. But I had a good time at U of R.
How did you adapt? Kids spending the last 5 years in the Caribbean comes to New York, and not only New York but upstate New York. How did you deal with the weather, that immediate change? Yeah,
the weather wasn't very much of a problem. My adjustment happened in high school. That was the hard part, right? Because I left in one era and came back in another era. So the language was different, the pounds were different, like everything was different.
You probably had a little more of an accent.
Right, yeah. Nobody understood what I was saying, right? That made it really hard because I was funny, but if it doesn't translate, then it doesn't translate. But by the time I got to U of R, I was used to the weather. The U of R was also a little more refreshing because you didn't run into a lot of challenges that you run into when you're in the city.
I want to say something about your education in Barbados because my father, who had a similar story, born in St. Croix, goes to his elementary schooling in St. Croix under a great educator named Mr. Emmanuel. He and his wife, husband, wife, principal, teacher. That's it. All of the kids in that area of the island, one-room schoolhouse. When he gets to America, or to mainland America, that is, and he takes the tests for the specialized high schools, he gets into Stuyvesant. And they're wondering how this kid, who just got here recently, can actually test into one of the 4 specialized high schools in New York at that time. So it's like speaks well to.
Yeah, the education the education system there is phenomenal. When I came here, they put me in remedial classes because that tends to be like what they do with kids who are coming up from the Caribbean. I think there's some.
You can almost lose a year sometimes. They almost put you back a year.
Very easy. I think I don't know what drives that other than bias or some kind of crazy thinking, but they did that. And what happened is those teachers came forward and they said, listen, I don't think this guy is supposed to be here, right? And then they said, well, and then they did their caucus, and then they said, well, we're going to put you in these honors program. And I was like, well, what is that? 'Cause we don't use that kind of language. And they said, well, it's for students who have 90 average. My heart almost fell out of my chest, right? Because I was like across all subjects, they have a 90? And they were like, yeah, it's for those people. And I wanted to say, should I tell them that's not me? See, like in Barbados, there's no curve. You don't get credit for showing up. You don't get credit for participation, none of that. 50% is passing. You could be in the low 70s and be #1 in your class. The work is
Rigor.
Very difficult. So the 90-plus students like the white whale. I mean, you heard of it, but you never
But you haven't seen it.
right?
Yeah.
So, but then, I kind of went into the classes and I realized it was just very doable. It was like you show up.
But you had done the work.
Yeah.
You'd put in the work, you'd put in the time,
Yeah.
and at the end of it was a reward.
Yeah, absolutely.
So after undergraduate, you graduate, you're an engineer, which by all accounts, phenomenal achievement. A chemical engineer at that.
Yeah. It was, Chemie is one of arguably the most difficult undergraduate engineering
I've
field.
walked past the building many a day.
Yeah.
I haven't went in, but I've walked past that building.
And I always liked science and math. And, one of the great things about it is it allowed you to, one of the things I liked about it was so many things went through the manufacturing process, and if you knew how to make things better, you could have less negative impact. So I thought it could be very, very useful. The other thing was engineers are like problem solvers. They're always figuring out how stuff works and the most efficient way to do things. And I like that a lot. But I was also very, very engaged when I was in school as, part of fraternity, part of the Black Students Union, and very engaged in the National Society of Black Engineers, and trying to make impact in our community at all points.
Okay.
And then coming out of that, I wanted to do some engineering. Right? If you work that hard, 50% of chemical engineers at the time didn't do any chemical engineering. They would go off and do all kinds of things.
They had that
some
basis,
mindset, which is great. But I wanted to do some engineering.
You mentioned college, you said other activities, Black Student Union fraternities. Which fraternities?
So I'm a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated.
Okay. My uncle, the first member of my mother's family to go to college, went to Savannah State. This is pre-Vietnam, and he actually is a member of Alpha Phi Alpha.
Nice.
So that was the first person that my family had ever heard of even joining something called a fraternity. Everybody went to the military. So
it's amazing.
And then you said, so chemical engineering, and you're working in which fields after that?
So I went and worked actually at a company called International Paper. So I was in the paper industry, and I was doing process engineering. And it was really interesting. Like when I started, I wanted to go someplace where there was a lot of challenges, and it would give young people lots of responsibilities quickly. Like I didn't want to wait to tackle things, right? And they had a huge amount of challenges. Like my first job, they were like, look, we have built this recycle plant. We thought it was going to work out well. It didn't work out well. That's going to be shut down in October. Okay. And it's going to be effluent coming back. And that's going to screw up our process. And your job is to fix it. And if you don't, it's going to cost us $1 million a year. Okay. And you have to October to do it.
Wow. Until October. So they immediately trial by fire. They put your feet right in there.
With lots of support, but it was the kind of thing I was looking for, right? You could dive in, you could figure it out, and you could do your best to solution it. And I did, right?
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Okay, we're about to take a station break, but when we come back, we're going to get into your postgraduate experiences in the professional world.
Yep.
You've messed up your son's haircut.
Mom?
Do you A, try to fix it?
Like it never happened.
B, work with what you got? Or C, show solidarity?
Thank you, babe.
As a parent, there are no perfect answers. But you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
We just finished dinner and it was time for homework. He hates homework.
It makes no sense.
I don't know how he finds anything in his backpack.
I can't find my backpack.
Finally, we found his assignment. He rushed through it. I wonder if he even learned anything.
I wasn't gonna get it right, so I just wanted to get back to playing my video game. At least I'm good at that.
I couldn't even read his handwriting.
Holding the pencil makes my hand hurt.
I know he's bright.
Why is it so hard for me?
He's
I'm
just
trying
gotta
as
try a
hard
little
as
harder.
I can.
When you can see learning and attention issues from their side, you can be on their side. That's why there's Understood.org, a free online resource for the parents of the 1 in 5 kids with learning and attention issues. Here you'll get personalized recommendations, practical tips, daily access to experts, and more. Go from misunderstanding to understood.org.
Okay, Shawn, to pick up where we left off, you've gotten your undergraduate degree in arguably one of the coldest places in New York State, but you not being, you're no coward, you now sign up to go to Chicago.
That's right. I'm a glutton for punishment.
Yes, tell us about that.
We get hit with the snow in Rochester, and then we go for the wind and the snow.
The wind, the snow, and the cold.
In Chicago.
On the frozen tundra.
Yeah. So I practiced engineering for about 3 or so years, and thoroughly enjoyed that experience, and got a lot of wonderful exposures. Got to manage people and do a lot of process engineering work, right? Figure out how to make things cheaper and more effective. I wanted to kind of bone up and strengthen like what I call the language of business, so the accounting and finance and marketing and things like that. So I wanted to go back and get my MBA.
Okay.
The other thing is, mergers and acquisitions and things like that affect whole industries, right?
Yeah, they affect industries in many a way, but especially in money.
Yes.
That's the big
right.
money thing.
Right, and people and resources, right? So I wanted to also understand that more so. So, I applied to a bunch of business schools, was blessed to get into Chicago. It was
Which is the #1 business school, most of the years.
It's been ranked #1 for many, many, many years. The challenge was, I didn't know anyone who had gone to a top business school. So you don't have the person to lean on to help you figure out the puzzle. So that was a little bit of a challenge. And I got accepted to Chicago, which was terrific, right? Phenomenal. And I loved it. Some people get intimidated by business school and some of the more rigorous ones. Because I was a math and engineering person already. It's just math, you know what I mean? They're adding and subtracting. It's not that. It gets a lot worse, trust me, when you go deep into chemical engineering. So I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed my classmates and the professors and the way that they approach problems, right? And that we would be going through business cases, and a professor would ask, did anyone work on this? Because you could have the person who was at that company and on that project in the classroom.
In the classroom.
It was really a wonderful thing to behold.
To be in the 1% of the 1%.
Absolutely, right? And to understand how people think and how they partner, how we work together, and what people value. I also went there in the midst of the economic downturn from the 2000 area.
Okay.
Right? So you got the dot-com implosion. So you've got all kinds of, it was a very difficult time for a lot of MBA students. But I loved my experience at Chicago. I learned a ton. I think it reinforced my engineering training. I had I had a lot of great professors, but there was this one who would teach us about macroeconomics. And he would just give you a statement that was made by a chief economist at some big bank and say, with what we've covered in class, please examine this statement. And you had to know what it meant, what rules to apply, what framework to think through, so you can analyze it. And I love that. It wasn't a C-spot run kind of way of approaching problems. It was, how do you apply what you learned? So I enjoyed being there for the 2 years.
Okay, all right. Can you tell us a little bit about your transition from the financial world into Good Steward LLC?
Yeah, so I worked at IBM, and then I worked at another company called Amphenol.
Yes.
Where I did a lot of finance and strategy, mergers and acquisitions. And
that was global. You were traveling all over.
Absolutely. My last role when I was at Amphenol, they have a division called IT and Data Communications products. So I was their director of business development globally. So I worked on strategic planning and looking for companies to acquire, right? So I got a chance to, I've been to about maybe 25 different cities across China. Wow. I've done deals in China, I've done deals in Japan, I've done deals in Europe, stateside. So it was a terrific experience. The challenge there was traveling a lot, right?
Being away from home.
Yeah, so
young
I was
family.
away from home 70-80% of the time with a young family, and that becomes very difficult. And even when doing all that, I would always be very engaged, right? We were part of an organization called the Horde Foundation that provides scholarships to black students going off to college. So my wife was the chair of the scholarship committee and then became chair of the organization. And during our tenure there, we distributed over $2 million to black students going off to university.
Universities.
So even being on the flights and planes everywhere, still very active.
Still a social component to your activity.
Absolutely, right? And then the idea was, okay, how can I be closer to home to have more? You want to be present, right, as a father. That's super critical, particularly at this time. And doing similar roles at other companies is similar levels of travel. So I started thinking about what else, I would wind up doing. And I wanted to have impact. And one of the things that I noticed was, we're missing a certain level of information about how to manage our resources, right? And I was very good at that. One, from training, but really just from the school of hard knocks. Like when you start literally with no resources and you're trying to make $1 out of 15 cents, you either can get in big trouble or you get really good at it. And I got really good at it. So I wanted to help other people figure out how to do that too, so that they can accumulate wealth. So it became workshops, it became talks, it became a host of things, then it became classes.
Okay. Online?
And online classes, full series of online classes. And then eventually a book which will be coming out under this company that we call Good Steward. Because at the end of the day, we want to be good steward of the resources that we have, right? And that doesn't happen by osmosis, that happens by training. A lot of information like our parents don't have to give to us. And I just wanted to be able to, have us do our part to solve that.
Okay. I'd like to get into a little bit of the book, The Black Tax. I'd also like to get into some of the paradigm that you've created. But first I want to pull up onto the screen just a graphic of what hundreds, thousands, millions, what those actually look like, because many times people don't realize what we're talking about when we speak to thousands versus millions versus trillions. When we're dealing with trillions, you're dealing with 12 zeros, millions, 6 zeros. Do you believe that people can actually conceptualize these numbers? They can actually get a feeling for them?
Yeah, it's good to get things in proportion, right? And I like what you're doing with that, because you've got 1,000, right? And then a million is 1,000,000. You know what I mean? And then a billion is it's like if you had $1,000 million bills.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And then if you have a trillion, it's
Next slide, please.
It's like you have 1,000 billion. The orders of magnitude. So when you start talking about $1 trillion, it really does become hard to figure out, like, what does that mean? And the shortest version is it's a million.
Exactly.
Right? Or it's 1,000 billion. The short version is this is a really big number. It's gargantuan.
Listen, when doing the research and talking with the team, and we started putting together graphics and bringing things up, one of the things that stood out to me is this graphic here, and I can't take credit for it. It was created by someone else, but it says here that 1 billion minutes ago was just after the birth of Christ. And in terms of time continuum, that puts it in perspective for me of how long that is. Now, when you translate it to dollars, when you're without trillions of dollars, there's no way to recover from that without an important strategic plan. You can't just wish yourself or complain yourself through $1 million.
Yeah.
You can't.
The size and the scope of it, it really prompts people to see things differently. It prompts people to ask really tough questions about what happened, and then what can I do, and what can we do, right, together to be able to solution it. It's if you think you got to fill a bucket, you got a bucket this big, or you have a bucket the size of this room.
Imagine filling a swimming pool with a thimble.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
We got to come up with a different strategy to be able to do that in a
Exactly.
reasonably short period of time.
How long did it take you to write The Black Tax? And can we have the book up on the screen?
It took, the Black Tax was an evolution over a period of about, 2.5 years. The last 9 or 10 months was just very, very intensive, I actually wrote 2 books at the same time. That was one of those books.
Okay.
And it's almost like as you start the investigative process of trying to understand how we got here, you ever notice when you pull out a sweater, the thread starts to
unravel.
some really interesting things start happening when you start pulling at that thread. So it was a terrific, humbling, and oftentimes harrowing kind of experience to learn all of this stuff.
The numbers that you allude to, that you point out very concretely and specifically, are incredible. Next slide, please. There's some key markets that we as a people are underperforming in. The automotive market, housing, jobs, high-end careers, online banking and finance. And in your book, you segment out these markets and you point out exactly what's happening to us as a people, and translate that into real-time dollars.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that?
Yeah. I'd also like to share about what the black tax is,
go ahead.
because what we're talking about is the black tax in each of those markets. And the black tax is the financial cost of discrimination against black people in America.
Okay. Please, I don't want you guys to not hear that, the financial cost of discrimination here in America, because we march about it, we boycott, we do a lot of different things, but we actually don't have our fingers on what that cost actually is and what can be done about it.
So as you just said, we normally speak about it in terms of the injustice,
emotionally,
or the morality standpoint. But I want to talk about it from what's the cost, and more importantly, what does research say those costs are, right? Because if there's a cost, then it affects cash flow, it affects assets, it affects ownership, it affects legacy, right? And we're all about leaving a legacy for our children and their children. So, and then the issue becomes, well, what's driving that? And what's driving that is there's a high level of bias in America against black people, anti-black bias. And there's 2 kinds of it. There's the explicit, what we know, and what we're doing intentionally. Then there's the implicit, the subconscious version, which is what we're not doing, what we don't know. Either way, there's a cost.
There's something going on.
There is a cost. Now, we have to pay homage to, some people are doing things intentionally, right? Many people are not, but there's still a cost. And then the issue is, well, what are those bias levels? And even if you looked at it from like the subconscious perspective, you know, Harvard's done a lot of work on that.
But I hate to cut you off at this point,
Sure.
but these shows move very, very quickly. We're going to love to bring you back for a second and a third to this series. So I'm getting signaled I have to go. But once again, thank you very, very, very much. We appreciate all your effort, all your research, and it's a gift to be able to read this book and then pass it on to somebody else.
Thank you.
Shawn D. Rochester, thank you very much. I appreciate you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being on your show.
People's Forum, thank you very much. Please catch us again. My name is Kwame Ennis. I'm the host. And thank you very much.